What's up everybody, I'm HoopsandHipHop and welcome to another fact and trivia video. As you might be able to tell, I'm trying out a new format with this video. I'm hoping to work more on-camera footage into my videos from now on, so let me know what you think of this setup in the comments below. We've got a lot to cover today, so let's get right into it. Pokemon is one of the only major video game franchises to have its main series of games on a handheld system as opposed to a home console. However, thanks to the franchise's popularity, it has seen a bunch of games that have made their way to the various Nintendo home consoles throughout the years. Some of them are all-time classics, and others are not, but as a whole they contain many interesting bits of facts and trivia, and that's exactly what today's video is all about. There aren't facts from every game in this video, just ones that I found interesting enough to share, but there are still a bunch of them, so make sure you leave a like if you enjoy and subscribe for more. And without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So how about we start the video with the very first Pokemon home console game that was ever released. In case you couldn't come up with a guess, that game would be Pokemon Stadium. However, the game most of us know as Pokemon Stadium 1 is actually Pokemon Stadium 2. This is the actual Pokemon Stadium 1, and therefore the very first Pokemon home console game that was ever released. It was a Japan exclusive title that released in 1998, and is essentially a beta version of the American and European Pokemon Stadium 1. It offers limited features, and only 42 of the original 151 Pokemon were made playable. An interesting fact about the Pokemon themselves in Stadium is that nicknamed Pokemon have slightly altered colorations when used in battle. This is why most NPC trainers in the game have nicknamed Pokemon in order to emphasize this effect. It's also one of the only scenarios in which NPCs have nicknamed Pokemon, and is technically the first appearance of shiny Pokemon, although these were never officially labeled as shinies. The color alterations are determined by the Pokemon's nickname as well as the original trainer's trainer ID number and that trainer's name. So even if two players have the same Pokemon with the same nickname, the two Pokemon will most likely have different colorations. Pokemon Stadium was also another title in which the late Satoru Iwata worked his magic. During the Iwata Asks interview series, it was stated that Iwata was responsible for programming the game's battle system and ported it over from the original Red and Green versions. Iwata did this without the specification documents from Game Freak that would have told him how the system worked, and instead studied it himself from Red and Green. Shigeki Morimoto, who created the battle system for Red and Green, commented on how it took him a long time to create this system for the original games, yet it was ported to Pokemon Stadium by Iwata in a week. Again, this was done by Iwata studying the system himself rather than having proper documentation, which is another testament to the greatness of Mr. Iwata. Wrapping up the facts on the Stadium series is an interesting tidbit about Pokemon Stadium 2. In the game, there is an item called the Color Case, and it allows you to transfer items between the three Generation 1 games. Using this ability, it is possible to visit Saffron City early and face Sabrina as the second gym leader, so long as you transfer a drink for the Saffron City guards. Next up on the list is Hey You Pikachu, and honestly, this wouldn't be a proper Pokemon home console video without it. There honestly isn't a whole lot to say about this game, but there are still a couple facts worth mentioning. It's a popular belief that saying the words Sony or PlayStation will cause Pikachu to get angry. This actually isn't the case, however, if you call him an electric rat, he will get mad at you. Hey You Pikachu also has the interesting distinction of being the first Pokemon game to feature a Pokemon from the upcoming generation, and that of course would be Togepi. Turning our attention back to the better N64 Pokemon games, next in line is Pokemon Snap. Starting at its roots, Pokemon Snap wasn't even going to be a Pokemon game originally. The original idea was for it to be a quote-unquote normal game in which you also took photos, but at the time, the motivation for playing the game wasn't clear. It wasn't until the Pokemon world was introduced as a possible basis for the game that it finally found its motivation. During Pokemon Snap's release window, several promotions were ran for the game. The first came from Blockbuster, where for $3, you could get pictures from your game printed out as stickers. The next promotion came in the form of two separate contests, held by Japanese magazine CoroCoro Comic and Japanese variety show 64 Mario Stadium. These were photo contests, challenging gamers to take the best photos they could in their Pokemon Snap games, with the winners getting their pictures featured on actual Pokemon trading cards. Today, these cards are some of the rarest Pokemon cards in existence. Moving on from the Nintendo 64, the next Nintendo home console would be the Gamecube, and the Gamecube houses what are probably the best two Pokemon home console games, Pokemon Colosseum and Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness. Pokemon Colosseum and XD Gale of Darkness take place in the Ori region. Ori is, for the most part, very dry and barren, and that's because it's actually based on the US city of Phoenix, Arizona. Ori also has a very cool naming scheme when it comes to its cities and towns. Starting with the region as a whole, the name Ori comes from the word ore, which are a type of rock that have various valuable minerals inside of them. And just like ore has valuable minerals inside of it, Ori has minerals inside of it as well, as each of its cities and towns are named after minerals. However, Gateon Port is an exception to this, at least in English. It gets its name from Gate, which refers to it being both the first and last town that you visit during the main story in Pokemon XD. Eon comes from the fact that you receive an item to evolve your Eevee there, and Eon is the common suffix of every evolution. Its Japanese name, however, is Io Port, which follows the trend and comes from the mineral Iolite. Agate Village, simply enough, comes from the mineral agate. Pyrite Town comes from the mineral pyrite, which is also known as Fool's Gold. This is fitting since it is essentially fake gold, and Pyrite Town is full of criminals who would probably try to sell it as real gold if they had the chance. Phoenix City gets its name from the phoenixite mineral, and also from Phoenix, Arizona, as it too, in addition to Ori as a whole, is based on Phoenix. The origin stories of Phoenix and Phoenix are actually quite similar. Phoenix was founded when Mayor Escad's grandfather drew water into the city, as mentioned by a resident in-game. Phoenix was founded by a man named Jack Swilling, who had built a series of canals to also bring water into the area. These canals followed a similar system that was used by ancient Native Americans, and the towns that began to develop alongside them were built on top of ruins of those same Native Americans. Eventually, the city came to be known as Phoenix, as it was a city born from the ruins of a former civilization. Rounding out the Colosseum and XD trivia with a few smaller tidbits of information, Pokemon Colosseum is the only game where none of the members of the Zubat family are obtainable without trading. I suddenly seem to like the Ori region a whole lot more now. Anyway, an interesting fact about the game's packaging is that Groudon and Kyogre appear on the game's box art despite being unobtainable unless traded from a Game Boy Advance game. This marks the only time that something like this occurs, with the exception of the Pokemon box game, which, let's be honest, isn't really a game at all. Now this last fact is a bit of an interesting one. Before Pokemon XD was released, Reggie Fils-Aimé stated that Pokemon XD would not be a sequel to Colosseum, but instead a whole new game with a similar style to Ruby and Sapphire. Now this is an interesting statement, because XD essentially is a sequel to Colosseum, taking place once again in the Ori region about 5 years later. It's also not really similar in style to Ruby and Sapphire either, so it makes you wonder what the original plan was for the game when Reggie made this statement. Moving on to the more modern entries in the home console series, we've got a couple facts about Pokemon Battle Revolution. Released in North America on June 25, 2007, it was the first Pokemon home console game to release on the Wii. Most notably, Battle Revolution was the last Nintendo game to feature the Nintendo Player's Guide that came from Nintendo Power, which was discontinued in December of 2012. And finally, there's the most recent home console game, Pokken Tournament. Pokken Tournament is a crossover between Pokemon, obviously, and Tekken. The game takes place in the region of Farum, which is the Latin word for iron. This is a reference to Tekken, which means Iron Fist in Japanese. Also, the German version of the game is the only version that doesn't use the portmanteau Pokken, and goes by Pokemon Tekken instead. This is possibly because Pokken sounds similar to the German word Pocken, meaning smallpox. And those were some facts and trivia about the Pokemon home console games. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I really hope you guys like this new setup with more on-camera footage. I finally have good enough video and audio quality to where I feel comfortable doing on-camera footage, and I'm really looking forward to doing more in the future. With that being said though, I will see you guys soon with another video, and until then, I'll smell you guys later.